Good evening and welcome to the regular school board meeting for Independent School District 833. It is Thursday, May 7th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. and we are in a teleconference format. 2.0 is roll call.
Melinda Doles.
Here.
Louise Hines.
Here.
Simi Petnaik.
Here.
Pat Driscoll.
Here.
Sharon Van Leer.
Here.
Katie Schwartz.
Here.
Tracy Burnett.
Here. Thank you. 3.0 is the approval of our agenda, and we do have an amendment adding 10.3, which is the approval of a resolution placing continuing contract teachers on unrequested leaves of absence. So if you wouldn't mind, if you make the motion, please say your name first. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the format of the agenda with the amendment.
So moved.
Sharon Van Leer, so moved.
Louise, second.
All right, roll call vote.
Melinda Doles.
Yes.
Louise Hines.
Yes.
Simi Petnaik.
Yes.
Pat Driscoll.
Yes.
Sharon Van Leer.
Yes.
Katie Schwartz.
Yes.
Tracy Burnett.
Yes. Thank you. 4.0 are district highlights. They will be on our agenda for May 21st. Public comment is 5.0. That will also be on our May 21st agenda. So we will not be reading any comments this evening, but if you do have any, please send them in and we'll read them next time on May 21st. 6.0 is our consent agenda. All consent items are considered routine and non-controversial at school board and will be approved by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items, but prior to the meeting, board members had the opportunity to review each of the items and could have requested that one be moved to an action item for individual consideration. That has not happened for this evening, so I'll entertain a motion to approve our consent agenda.
Sharon Van Leer.
Melinda, second.
All right, roll call, please.
Melinda Doles.
Yes.
Louise Hines.
Yes.
Simi Petnaik.
Yes.
Pat Driscoll.
Yes.
Sharon Van Leer.
Yes.
Katie Schwartz. Katie Schwartz.
Yes.
Tracy Burnett.
Yes, thank you. 7.0 are workshop items. 7.1 is our teacher survey, and our Director of Teaching, Kelly Jansen, will present this item.
Yes, good evening, Chair Burnett, Dr. Jacobus, board members, and cabinet. I have a couple workshop items, and tonight we're going to start with our Director of Program Evaluation, Research, and Assessment, John Lindner, presenting the teacher survey results around their thoughts and feelings in distance learning. Teachers were sent this survey on Monday, April 13th, and it closed on Friday, April 17th. So with that, I will turn it over to John, and then we'll be back to answer questions as you have them.
Okay. Good evening, Madam Chair, school board members, and Dr. Jacobus. As Kelly said, my name is John Lindner. I'm just going to go over our teacher survey on distance learning. It was the first one we've done. The purpose of the survey was to get an idea of readiness, understand how teachers are communicating with students, and give teachers an opportunity to give us some feedback. This presentation is really going to focus on the first and third bullets. That's because the second purpose is a little more nuts and bolts around tool usage, and that's just not very useful for most things, but it really helps us on a technical side. Before I get too far in this, I do want to say, because we want to give teachers space to be open and give honest feedback, We intentionally asked very few questions that would allow us to identify individuals. As an example, we did not ask grade level that they taught, subjects, or their years of experience. At the elementary level, we did ask if a teacher was a classroom teacher, a specialist, or some other type of teacher, just to get a feel of the mix. But at the secondary level, we did not ask those type of questions because they're all classroom teachers. To make the information a little more useful for our principals, we did ask what schools the teachers were teaching at, so our principals could know how their teachers were feeling. There are approximately 1,700 teachers received the email or the invite to participate in the survey. 849 teachers did participate. The largest group was elementary, which makes sense since that's where most of our teachers are. 79% of our teachers said preparing for distance learning took much more or somewhat more time than traditional instruction. This would be things like preparing lessons, video, audio, or readings, specifically moving to either Seesaw or Schoology. It also is things like assignments, making it a little more digital friendly, assessments, and just in general prepping materials. A big question we have been asked is, how did the content of what is taught change? Moving to distance learning has caused a lot of change in what gets taught and is very different based on grade level. The blue bar here is the idea of adding some new content while focusing on review and making sure students got what was taught. The idea of the blue bar is, in traditional instruction, it's a little easier for teachers to do quick formative assessment because they can see the faces. So teachers have to be a little more planful in that area with the distance learning models. So that's kind of what this blue bar represents. The red bar is pretty much, I did the exact same thing I was going to do in my traditional classroom. And the purple bar is, I'm really just focusing on review and mastering content previously taught, making sure there are no gaps in what I had taught prior. The majority of elementary is in this blue area. Secondary was a little different, where we see a larger number of teachers in this red area. This probably has something to do with the fact that our secondaries are in more of a class structure in discrete subject areas. Many teachers, we have a relatively small number of teachers in that purple area, which is, I think, something we all really wanted to see, is there's still new content being delivered to our students. In the question of, I was provided the right tool and resources. Teachers largely thought they had the right tools to do distance learning. The majority of teachers also thought, that's this area, the second pie graph is that teachers also thought that they had enough PD. As always, we are going to look at, so if this is more around the technical of how PD, we're going to look at how we use the tools. That's what this PD is really about, not from a technical perspective, but not necessarily the perspective of instruction. Moving forward, we will look at how now that we know how to use these tools, how are we going to use them effectively for instruction. I'm going to throw in a quote here from one of our teachers on this specific question. The challenge early on was getting comfortable with new platforms such as Seesaw, Zoom, and WebEx. But as I get better at these tools, the amount of meaningful connections is improving daily, which is a good thing to hear. If we move towards the feedback, very similar to what we did with that parent and student survey, we asked the teachers the same grading questions. Overall, the district had high marks in most areas. You see a lot of A's and B's. The A's are the green, the B's are the blue. The teachers gave the lowest marks in this first column of clear expectations of what you are supposed to teach. Especially as we went through the comments, some teachers are really interested in a little more guidance on specific things they were supposed to teach and how that changes with distance learning. What's probably the most important visual we're going to see today is around that student-teacher relationship. And this is very much related to what we saw 2 weeks ago when we looked at the student survey. We see that students and teachers think that their teacher relationships have suffered since distance learning. Over half the teachers in elementary and high school felt that their student-teacher relationship is worse than it was prior to distance learning. A large portion, 40%, 27% in elementary and middle school and 27% in high school, felt it was the same, but we're not really seeing large numbers of people feeling our relationships are getting better with distance learning. Just overall important findings, the governor's decision to give us a week and a half of preparation time was necessary. Teachers needed that time to plan and improve and move their instruction online. Teachers are having to reprioritize and figure out how they're going to cover content and embed review into their instruction. Teachers would like a little more guidance on what content they are supposed to cover. And similar to the student survey, teachers feel the face-to-face human interactions are important. Many teachers feel their student-teacher relationships are suffering. Just want to give one last quote from a teacher that kind of feel like encapsulated what the teacher said in the comment section. It's regarding distance learning. It's lonely. I miss my colleagues and the kids. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Hey, John, this is Simi.
Yes.
When we went to distance learning, can you remind me, our kids are not learning exactly what they would be learning if they were still in the classroom, right? There's some smaller percentage. Do you know what, can you remind me what that percentage is? Like, are they learning half as much, or
I can jump in,
60% or something like that?
Our guidance was about 50 to 60% of your general content for our secondary teachers. For elementary, we laid out some estimated time for student completion of work. So we were looking at like 30 to 40 minutes of reading instruction, 30 to 40 minutes of math. And so for elementary, it came out to about 110 minutes per day total. And for secondary, we gave teachers the guidance of think about 50 to 60% of your normal content and really focus on your priority standards. So that was the guidance we gave.
So if teachers wanted to teach 100%, I mean, because it looks like, what is it, 80% of them don't have, or say that they're spending more time to teach less content than they would typically teach. So do you know, or do we have a feel for how much more time teachers would require if we wanted them to teach the full content?
I think it would be a few more questions than just time. I think we would have to consider synchronous instruction. So there would be some requirements of specific times. Because I think that's where we found that teachers were missing, was that specific time that our kids had to be in front of their computer for this hour or for that hour. That would be one thing we would look at as far as giving more direction on new content. I think as we've grown in this, I think everybody has grown. So I don't know, I think that'd be an interesting conversation to ask our teachers about what is it that you would need if you were to be 100% online teacher. We'll talk a little bit later about distance learning isn't online classes. And I think especially it's an easy jump for secondary because that our kids had computers and things were in Schoology. So yeah, I think there would have to be a little bit more digging, but I think a bigger factor would be that making that synchronous time.
Okay. I did have one other question around the teacher-student relationship, because it looks like at middle school and elementary, there's still a sizable chunk who thinks it's about the same, but at high school, it seems smaller. And are there any plans to help high school teachers or help foster that relationship, distance learning relationship between high school students and their teachers?
Yes, we'll talk about that in our 2.0. I would
okay.
also add too that high school started third try in distance learning. So some of these kids and some of these teachers have never seen each other. So I think that probably hindered that feeling of actually knowing who kids were. So I think that also came into play there, but we'll talk about some of the changes we made for the next phase. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have a question? Great. Then we can move on to 7.2, which was the distance learning 2.0.
Yes, thank you. I am going to do my best to share my screen here and walk through our plans for distance learning 2.0. We did not create that name. If you're tired of hearing 2.0 and 4.0, and the Department of Ed has referred to this phase as their kind of next 2.0, so that's where we are using it. So before I begin, we've been asked to provide updates because I think it's obviously this is seismic shift. So as we've done it and as we've had these conversations, we really wanted to reach out to some of our teachers and some of our teacher leaders in particular to help us provide insight so that you can see other voices when we talk about how is distance learning going. So tonight I embedded two of those presentations in this presentation. The first one is from our middle school student achievement specialists or instructional coaches. And I'm going to play that, and then I'll end with one from our high school student achievement specialists. So.
Here we are on my Schoology page. I like to look over here at the upcoming calendar, but I also think it's important to check each teacher's page. Let's go into math. Each teacher has a red distance learning folder. When I go in there, I find the current week, and most teachers provide an agenda, like this peek at the week here. If I go into it, it just shows the agenda for the week. And it loads. And then the assignments that I have to do on the days. When I go back, I find my Thursday, which is the day we're on, and then I just go in order on what I have to do. And in this folder it shows, in each folder it'll show what I need to complete that day and the resources that my teachers are providing. If I go into content area reading strategies, this one I click the distance distance learning folder again, but this is a little different. She has it, I don't know, its layout is a little different. It still has the agenda, but right away it just says what we have to do. So I check the agenda and then complete what is assigned. Every day when I finish my assignments, I turn off my computer, put it away, and wake up the next morning and do it all again.
Chapter of your life. Excuse me 1 second. Landon, I told you, I am filming. You need to be quiet. And then what are your hopes and dreams for American society following this historic pandemic? This is what my students see. This is what's actually going on. Day in the life.
All right. And so as you can see, distance learning has presented a number of unique challenges and opportunities. And as you know by now, the executive order has extended distance learning through the end of the year. And I think that video is just a great summary of the hard work that our students are putting in. Our educators truly are going above and beyond. And so as we look at distance learning 2.0, what is it that we can do better? And so we know that these school closures puts burdens on children and families, and it really disproportionately impacts our communities of color, as well as our Indigenous, immigrant, low-income families and communities, and students with disabilities and their families. So in Distance Learning 2.0, we've been charged to really ensure that every child is receiving the education they deserve, and just continue going above and beyond, which we know they're doing. So, and that was an excerpt from the Commissioner, Mary Catherine Ricker's letter as they announced the 2.0. So based on the guidance that came out from the governor and the commissioner, we created these 6 goals for Distance Learning 2.0. As I go through these goals, please know, we know many of our goals were already happening in the first phase of distance learning, and we just took this opportunity provided by 2.0 to make sure they were just explicitly outlined and giving that time to focus on them. So I'm going to do a brief overview, and then I have a slide for each of the goals so we can dig a little bit deeper. Our first goal is to support the health, safety, and well-being of students and staff, to maintain the relationships with students and staff, and continually reflect on and strengthen the additional support needed for our traditionally most underserved students and families. Take this opportunity to assess what was going well with distance learning and where do we need to do better as far as programming and services. That includes intentional outreach to our students who are struggling or who haven't engaged in distance learning up to this point. Our fourth goal is to provide students and families feedback related to progress. As you saw, there is learning happening, and so how are we going to make sure our parents understand what that learning looks like when we turn over feedback for them? Our fifth goal is community feedback. We talked about surveys a few meetings back, but just adding that intentional outreach to traditionally marginalized students and families. And then finally, develop a plan to transition back to school. Even if we are coming back in what we would have considered a normal environment or face-to-face, we know we still need to do some things differently. So preparing for what that might look like. For goal 1, we wanted to make sure that everyone took time to reach out and support each other, our students and families. And I think back to significant moments. And I think when we look back on distance learning and the things that we're going to remember, I know relationships and connections are going to be at the top of everybody's list. I hope that we continue this focus of making sure we stay connected when we come back in our what we considered traditional. So that was our first goal, just reaching out and supporting each other. Our second goal, we wanted to make sure we maintained continuity in relationships with students and families. We know that that was happening. We had specific time for teachers to reach out to our families before distance learning began. We also know there's no single roadmap to guarantee success and engagement, and every student, every family is different. So the purpose of this goal was to be really intentional about reaching out to our families, and in particular, those who may have been traditionally underserved by our system in the past, to make sure we're navigating what their needs are and to create effective partnerships with those students and those families. For our third goal, we wanted to take the opportunity to evaluate our practices and respond to the needs of students and families, and this is where your question comes in, Simi. We know our teachers are doing this on a constant basis. They're continually reflecting on how did today go? What do I need to do different? So we just wanted to create a system that we could put in place to support the needs of our learners based on the feedback that we received. So for 2.0, we were looking to evolve in 3 different ways. So making sure that we were distinguishing between attendance and participation. Attendance is easy to determine when there's a physical person that walks through your door, but not having time-bound attendance practices were super important in this asynchronous distance learning, and also making sure we're keeping track of participation were very important. So just really taking time to distinguish between the 2 of those. The second area that we were hoping to evolve is personalizing learning. So working with families on workload, whether maybe there was 3 or 4 kids at home and just the amount of posts or activities were just overwhelming. So making sure teachers were personalizing that workload, and even looking at some of our students who we could modify schedules or their workload, and be intentional about making sure that they have what they need as far as time in their day to be successful. And then the last one is that dedicated time to connect. So dedicated time to build relationships and create those partnerships with families. So we added win time to our elementary schools. So that's what I need time. So 1 day a week, our elementary schools have that. The middle school continued with the advisory time, which we've heard a lot of feedback from teachers on the value of making sure that they're connecting with kids, and from parents saying that it's nice to know that that's the day that they're going to be checking in with their teachers. And then for the high school, we added a check and connect day. So every Friday is check and connect, where teachers will have particular caseloads that they're reaching out to. We're reaching out to students who are in jeopardy of that no pass order and giving them feedback on how they could make it over that hump to get the credit for that course. So we added a day at the high school for check and connect. So we're hoping that helps increase the relationships, or the feeling of those relationships that we saw in the survey. Our fourth goal was to outline how was it that we could provide meaningful feedback. I know we are going to have an additional conversation this evening around secondary grading. So I will just take a moment to highlight what we're talking about at the elementary. As you know, we are not reporting on the standards-based progress report, so no official reporting for third try for elementary. But we are asking teachers to reach out and have conversations with families, and especially as it relates to their growth in literacy and math. And just making sure that families are going into the summer having a sense of how this year went for their kiddo, what they could look forward to, or what maybe there are some things that they could do to support learning this summer, and then maybe even having a conversation about next fall, just trying to ease their fears about being behind. We hear that word a lot, and so just ease their fears that everyone's in this boat, and we will do whatever we can to get everybody back where they need to be. Our fifth goal is a continuation to reach out to our stakeholders through the surveys with intentional process and outreach to increase the voice of our historically marginalized students and families. And so our REA department, John Lindner, is working with Corey Thompson, our Achievement Integration Director, and they've partnered in those intentional efforts to make sure that those voices are part of our community input. And then our last goal of 2.0 was to have a process to plan for the future. And I know you will be participating in these conversations with Dr. Jacobus. So just developing a plan that in the event we are not able to come back in what we would consider that face-to-face or traditional environment, what guiding principles do we want to build our framework around for if we are still in distance learning, and then if there's potential to be in a hybrid of distance learning and face-to-face. So we are holding focus groups for the next few weeks. We have every staff group is scheduled for a focus group, and they're optional for staff to attend. Our assistant principals and athletic directors are working to get our student voice. So we will be holding student focus groups. We have some parent advisory groups that will participate in focus groups. And then, like I mentioned, I know Dr. Jacobus will be working with you. And then we will take all of this qualitative data and put it into Qualtrics and do some text analysis and see what kind of themes come out of it, so that we can start looking at what is it that we want or what is it that we need to start planning for the fall, knowing that it could be any one of these or any combination of any one of these. So just a quick look at the timeline. And because of the nuances that have come with distance learning, and the end of the year has an opportunity for us to think about how we'd like to close out the year. So the new learning or any new posts will end on May 29th for elementary and June 1st for secondary, with that final week being time for teachers to provide feedback to students and families, engage with families to make sure they have what they need going into the summer months, and for secondary, really to focus on students who are in jeopardy of receiving no credit. And what is it that we could do for those students to make sure that they have the essential learning that we require. And we've also taken into account some of the challenges that students are facing with distance learning. So the last day of school for elementary is still June 3rd, and the last day for secondary is June 5th. And then I will close with a video from our high school student achievement specialists, made to reflect our high school learning experiences. And I didn't list their names because you will get to experience their colorful sign-off at the end. They are a very creative group. So it's been fun working with both of our middle school and high school SASs for this. But I thought it was a great way to finish kind of what our high school teachers and students are thinking around distance learning.
What is it like being a distance learning high school teacher right now? It's been kind of enlightening. here. Ooh, look at this. Look at this, everyone. This is real, actual homework being submitted on time. Wonderful, wonderful.
Can you help the girls with breakfast?
Get the kids breakfast. Yeah, right after I get to this. Let's just get into Schoology here. Oh, something went wrong. I'm just kind of getting down to trying to get some work done here. I think a really cool theme that is starting to emerge with all of our students and our staff is how we're willing to adapt and be flexible and learn new things and try new things and realize that some of the stuff that we are trying with these kids isn't going to work, and we're just going to keep working at it, trial and error, and see how good of a job we can get with these guys here before the end of May.
That is our secondary SASs, Ian Bronson at Park, Todd Hyland at Woodbury, and Adam Hayes at Eastridge. So I think it's awesome to be able to show you other voices as we talk about things that are happening throughout the system. So with that, I will take any questions.
All right.
Hey, Kelly, this is Simi. I just have one question, which is on the high school check and connect day. Those are targeted to specific students, or are all students supposed to be checked in and connected with?
All students have a check and connect advisor. So the check and connect advisor is working with students. Particular teachers are working with those other students that are behind. So
okay, so each student should hear from their advisor, and then some students will hear from multiple teachers.
Correct.
Yep.
I have a question, Kelly. This is Louise. I noticed that June 2nd to 5th in the secondary, working with kids who are in jeopardy of no credit. Is that the same plan for middle school kids who have that incomplete, or is there a different plan for them?
That is the same plan for all of secondary. Yep, they will be reaching out to those kiddos as well.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much for the update. We'll look forward to the focus groups. All right, 8.0 information items, 8.1 high school graduations, and our Assistant Superintendent Christine Schaefer will join us for this.
All right, good evening, Chair Brunette, school board members, Dr. Jacobus, and Cabinet. Tonight, I would like to update you on some of the discussions and planning we've been having related to options for graduation. I'd also like to share the survey we sent out to seniors and their families and what that showed us tonight. So with graduation ceremonies canceled across the state due to COVID-19, we've been working with the high school principals and their staff and looking at ways we can provide creative graduation ceremonies that honor seniors while keeping everyone safe. We understand how disappointing it is to students, teachers, and families to miss out on this milestone like graduation, and we will do what we can to provide an alternative celebration that is meaningful and memorable for the class of 2020. As part of our planning, we've created a survey for seniors and their families with the intent of getting their input on two options that we're proposing. So just for perspective, we have roughly 1,500 seniors in all of our high schools. So 1,500 seniors this went out to and their families. So our two options on the survey are, number one, a drive-through system. And a drive-through system could be done sometime in June. A drive-through system would allow seniors and their families to line up in the school parking lot in a single vehicle. A line of cars would move toward an outdoor stage where one student at a time would get out of their car, dressed in their cap and gown, have their name announced on a loudspeaker, walk across the stage to receive their diploma, and have their picture taken by a photographer. So some things to remember about that plan. Families would need to remain in their vehicle. The event would be live streamed. This type of ceremony could take place closer to the end of the school year. The number of graduates in attendance we would have to limit and do throughout the day. The proposal, of course, is contingent on our state guidelines. And we would have procedures in place for families that don't have a car. And a video recorded message would be shared with the graduates for all the speakers. So that's option one, the drive-through system. Option two is a modified ceremony that we would postpone to late July. A modified system would take place at the school, in the stadium, or in some type of outdoor setting at each school with a limited number of family members per graduate. The ceremony would take place late in July with the expectation that at that time, social distancing measures may be relaxed. So students would arrive dressed in their cap and gown. They'd have their name announced over a loudspeaker, walk the stage and get their diploma, and again, get their picture taken. So some things to consider with this plan. The number of graduates, again, would be limited. We would live stream the event. We would, again, share the graduation message online as opposed to a traditional speech. They could pick up the diploma in early June. But with this one, the date could be further delayed or not take place at all if our COVID-19 restrictions remain in place and are not lifted. Some students may not be able to participate in July, depending upon their post-secondary plans. And again, we'd have to wait for state guidelines. So that's option two. So option one is the drive-through in June. Option two is a ceremony at the school in July. And so with that, with those two, Pepe, could you bring up the survey results? So this is our first question. So we wanted to see who was filling it out. So we had about 790 seniors. That's about 40% of our seniors, and 1,052 parents that completed the survey. Can you go to the next one? All right, and here are our results. So for that option one, 281 seniors, 412 parents chose option one, which is the drive-through. Option two, 509 seniors and 640 parents selected that one. So as you can see, it's about a 60-40 split for those. So what we intend to do is take this input from our students and families, have more discussions about logistics, and in the meantime, see if we get any more recommendations from MDE or Governor Walz, and we will make a plan for a type of ceremony for our students. Again, though, everything is dependent on the guidance from the Department of Health and our social distancing guidelines. And we recognize that families and students have been preparing for years for accomplishing graduating from high school, and our intent is to provide something very memorable for them, for the class of 2020. So with that, what questions do you have?
I have a question, Melinda. Do we know what is there a certain deadline and when we have to make this decision by?
I wouldn't say we have a deadline, but the sooner our high schools can start planning, the better, because whichever option we take, there's a lot of work that goes into it with getting preparations and renting a stage and getting a sound system and all of that. So we'd like to make the decision probably in the next couple of weeks. The sooner the better, because we're getting close to the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So families can plan as well.
Yep.
Christine, this is Simi. Some of the things I have seen online or on social media, people have asked, why can't the district rent some third-party location that's large and do a modified graduation ceremony there? And I've seen like the drive-through mentioned or various like professional sports stadiums. So can you walk through why those are not appropriate options?
So we have looked into the drive-in theater option. They're hard to get a hold of because nobody's there. But we had Dan Hines as our maintenance manager. He did a sky view of the lot, and they have about 300 to 350 parking spots. So we won't be able to fit all of our seniors in that lot, which means we'd have to break them up. And so our thinking is, if we're going to have to split them up anyway, let's have it at their home school so they can have the graduation at their school. So doing it at that venue really didn't make sense. And as far as a stadium, there's a huge cost to that. But also we're not sure that the stadiums will be open. But really, and Keith, I think you mentioned, I think TCF and some of those big stadiums are $25,000 or $30,000 to rent. And we certainly can look into that, but we're not sure that those would be available either. Our goal was to provide two options that we really think realistically could happen. And so I don't know if realistically one of those big venues could happen. And then the drive-through just didn't make sense or work because we have so many seniors in each class.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
One more question. Hi, I have one more question. It's Melinda. So just for the people listening at home and the other parents of seniors, can you please explain what would happen if we went with option B and then there were guidelines by the health that you still couldn't do this? What would be the option then?
That is a really good question. We would probably have to go back to option A and do it that way, where everybody's safe, everybody's in their car, and we don't have too many people in one group. It's a good question.
As folks think about this, and we've had people send other options and thoughts, the high school principals had spoken to their advisor, their student advisory groups, and one of the things that kids were not excited about was a virtual ceremony, because part of the draw is to try to be together with some of your friends at least, and that might be part of the reason showing up later in July if they have a chance to be in a larger group, even if it's not the entire class, and be a little bit more normal. Our stadiums, even if we're social distancing, with using the fields, we can keep kids separated enough if the 6 foot is still in place, or even depending on the number of kids with the size of the field, we can separate that. We can seat about 2,000 people, so if we limit family members coming, we can make sure that families can sit separated. If we're able to, as Christine said, if we're able to bring large groups together, because that's still going to be a large group even though you're separated.
Anyone else have a question or comment? So ultimately, it looks like you were saying, the later July option was favored. Where do we go from here?
So now we will meet with the high school principals and cabinet members, and we will look at logistics to all of that and make a plan.
In my feeling, with the data that we have and all the discussion we've had, I would say we'd look at that July date. One, it gives us a chance to plan for something. If we can have people together and kids can be together, which is one of the desires that kids have voiced, and I think parents too, looking at asking, can we be together in a larger venue? We will make arrangements for kids who have to leave early to do some type of a ceremony for them, so parents will have a chance to see in cap and gown the diploma delivered with the principal and you folks as well, and with me there. So even if it is one person that is leaving, we can make that happen to make sure that there is a graduation memory that relatives can share and kids can share, along with getting that diploma.
Excuse me, with that in mind, Dr. Jacobus, would it make sense with that 60-40 if students would have to be split into groups anyway, to have one group that might do the drive-through earlier and another group later?
We could discuss that. I think that you have the double logistics piece, and we can talk about that if that's an option. One of the hopes, again, going a little bit later, is to have a chance to have something that more resembles a typical graduation, but we are going to talk with high school principals and take a look. Do we want to run two complete different ceremonies and work things out? That really isn't an option that it was something we've discussed in the past. And so.
All right, thank you for the update.
Thank you.
All right, 8.2 is our revised budget for fiscal year 19. And Dan Pioner, Director of Finance and Operations.
And you're still muted.
Good evening, Chair Burnett, members of the school board, Dr. Jacobus. Tonight we will talk about our 1920 revised budget. That's the current fiscal year we're in right now. And once a year we revise the budget after we set it last summer based on changes in enrollment counts, different changes that happen. We're allowed to do that. And the advantage of doing that is to have a better idea how we're going to end up and what our future looks like as we go into the next year. With that, I will share my screen and we will do the PowerPoint. First off, we'll just talk a little bit about that our finance department did get the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting for last fiscal year. We're proud of that. This is, I believe, the 13th year in a row that this district has received this. A lot of this has to do with the efforts of the finance staff, especially our Fiscal Services Director, Chris Blackburn, who does yeoman's job of all the financial reporting, getting things ready to go, putting together all the tables and things like that. We also get a lot of help from the rest of the finance staff and from the Human Resources Department, and of course from the department heads also. As we looked at the original budget back in that we did last summer, we originally had figured that we'd have about $249 million in projected revenues and about $250 million projected expenses. It was a projected deficit of about $1.1 million. As we look at the revised budget, and we'll go a little bit deeper into the numbers, but the revised revenues up a little bit, about $250 million, but the revised expenses about $253 million. Mainly, we'll talk about mainly what happened there, where the big difference was. It was basically in just one or two areas. So the new projected deficit is $2.2 million, which is a difference of about $1.1 million from the original budget. And as you know, any kind of deficit would eat away at the fund balance. As we look at our revenues, the local revenues was a decrease of about $2 million. A lot of that is attributed to the shutdown of the schools. We don't have any fees coming in for activities in the spring. The ones that did come in, we refunded. We also didn't have as many admissions and things like that. The state aid revenues increased about $3 million. That has to do with the enrollment, which we'll talk about later. And then the federal revenues increased a little bit, about $34,000. When we talk about revenues, just want you to be aware, and this I kind of tell you this stuff all the time. Just keep repeating this stuff all the time, but the Minnesota school districts are funded by a combination of state aid, local levies, federal aid, and fees. And the state aid is our largest portion of revenue. And it's good to remember that it's really a function they get the money from income taxes and sales tax. And obviously, if the economy is down, there's less income taxes and sales taxes, which means there's less money for the state and out in state aid. So we got to kind of keep an eye on that. The local levies are property taxes that have been approved by the local voters. Federal aid is funded by income taxes, obviously. We don't get a lot of federal aid, relatively speaking, for this district. And the fees are the local participation. When we look at revenues from state aid, we know that the basic formula means that for every student we have, that we're going to get $6,438 per student. I think it's added to with other things like referendums and other aids that come in, like compensatory dollars, referendum aid, local optional revenue, and operating capital, things like that. So we end up having an average of about $10,500 per student. The main driver of our state aid is enrollment. So besides the fact that the amount of $6,438 is determined by the state legislature, we multiply that number by the number of students in school. So we look at enrollment a lot. You can see that we've had increased enrollment for a long time, since fiscal year 12-13. It hasn't gone up in great leaps and bounds, but it's been a good steady 1% increase a year. And as you know, the 1% increase for us is about 180 students. We are looking at the future that it's going to rise a little faster as we see more housing starts, things like that. We take those into account as we do our future projections. So as we looked at back what we originally budgeted for enrollment last summer and what we're looking at what it's going to end up at, it was a good surprise that we actually are going to have more students than we thought we would have back then. So we originally projected 18,537 average daily memberships, as known as ADMs, and we will probably end up with about 18,760. So that causes the increase in the state aid revenue. We like to always have it go this way, so I'm usually pretty conservative when I budget the original average daily membership number. So when I do my projections, I base them more on what's happened in the past, called a cohort survival method, whereas as we do projections for long-range facility planning, we use cohort survival, but on a shorter time period. And then we also put in their housing starts, things like that, how the market's. Other aids that mean a lot to us, that increase the money that comes in, is special education aid is the biggest one. We actually get almost $29 million a year in special education aid, but we still have an $18 million cross subsidy, meaning that we spend that much more than we get in aid for special education. A special education aid is a reimbursement system, and they're changing the method, but they're always going to use the old method to make sure there's no harm done. But basically, we get reimbursed about 60% of our instructional teacher and para costs, not other costs, just those costs and not benefits. So it really comes out to about a 60% reimbursement method, leaving us with a big cross. LEP, limited English proficiency, there's aid there, $700 for PDM, gifted talented aid, other aids, and they all add up to our total aid. As I talked about the state of Minnesota revenue, I wanted to point out where most of the money comes from, because it's very important as we look ahead at what's going to happen with this pandemic response. The blue area is the individual income tax, and the orange area is sales tax. That is most of the revenue that comes in. And unfortunately, that revenue is highly dependent on the economy. Not a stable income source like property taxes. And where does the state spend most of their money? 41% of it is on K-12 education, so we have the largest part, and then about 30% is spent on health and human services. Just quickly about federal aids that we get, federal special education aid. Intended to offset the cost of the state funding sources. It is far, far short of that. The promise of IDEA was to reimburse 40% of the difference. That's never gotten higher than 12 or 13%. That's one place we look where we have special education issues funding wise. There's Title I money, there's Title II money, and there's Title III money. And just quickly, what happens on the local side, the property tax levy is our second largest source of income in the general fund. We have a referendum that was passed by the voters, operating levy. And if you add that to the local optional revenue, it's about $2,260 per ADM. And we also levy for operating capital, health and safety, all facilities, gifted and talented, community service, debt service, and safe schools. So on the expenditure side, what's the difference between the revised and the original? Well, we saw an increase of salaries of about $540,000, which isn't a lot percent-wise. Benefits, we actually had budgeted more than we needed, thank God. So that was down about 2.5%. Services, there's an increase of about 11%, 12%, and that's mainly because of contracted transportation. That's $3.5 million. Supplies, we're reducing the budget by $1.3 million, and capital was a increase basically based on putting some long-term facility maintenance projects ahead of schedule because of the schools were closed, but that's all covered by restricted revenue. It doesn't affect our fund balance. So as we talk about our expenditures, and as people talk to you about them, we're a service industry, obviously. Therefore, salaries and wages are our largest expenditures. Salaries are 57% of our expenditures. Benefits are 22% of our expenditures. It combines for almost 80% of our costs, our salaries and benefits. And if you look at those salaries and benefits in this district, as in every district, 72% of those salaries belong to licensed staff, meaning that contract negotiations are integral. And we always have to keep in mind when we do our budgets that there's a step and lane system, meaning that as teachers progress years, they may get an increase as they go another step. And if they get more education, they move over, and that's called a lane. Those have increases that are built into the salary schedule. The benefits side, if you're wondering what's in the benefits, it includes a lot. Health insurance, it's a DEBA payment, it's TRA, that's Teachers Retirement Association, pension payments, it's PERA, that's pension payments for everybody that's not a teacher or in the TRA. It's life insurance, it's dental insurance, it's tax shelter accounts, and workers' compensation. We are always looking at methods to lower the rising cost of health insurance. Sometimes there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And we're always monitoring how that's going, because that's one thing we have to make sure we get in the budget. We are putting out advertising for bids this year on health insurance, and that will tell us more. We should find out in at least next month, we believe, or the month after, how the bids came out. And we also will get bids on a self-insurance. The expenditure side still with the services. If you looked at the attachments in the packet, you'll see that services went up a lot. Most of that had to do with contracted transportation. We contract a good large portion of our special education transportation. We just don't have the manpower to do all the special ed transportation. We do about 13 to 15 routes ourselves. The rest are contracted. We found that between what we thought was going to happen and what's actually happened as far as needs, that it was about $2 million more than we had budgeted. So that's caused for the big increase in contracted transportation. That maybe softened a little bit as we look at what we're paying for this during this COVID crisis time when there's no services provided. We're required by the state to still pay the contractor. But we've been working out, our interpretation of the directive was that we had to make sure that the contractor paid all their employees and that there might be some other costs that we should pay, but we don't have to pay for what they would have normally spent on fuel and what they call liquids, which I imagine is oil and grease. So as we're working that out, right now we're paying about 85%. That could temper down our costs. Another area we pay is tuitions to other districts for special education. That's in the services. That's a big portion. And then, of course, utilities, electric, gas, and garbage. About 16% of our services cost. It's about $5.3 million. And supplies and capital, I know as we go look at, anytime we look at the budget and we talk about, oh, they don't need this and they don't need that, we can cut that out. Well, that's kind of what we call the low-hanging fruit when we talk about budget reductions. Actually, supplies only comprise about 3%. And in the last 3 years, it's only increased about 5.5%. There isn't a whole lot left there to reduce if we had to reduce. Capital expenditures are mainly operating capital and long-term facility maintenance projects. And those are all paid with restricted reserved amount revenues. So we can really never spend more than we have. Just a couple of comparative data. This is the most recent information we have. They haven't put out the 18-19 numbers, but 17-18 as we looked at where we rank, and these rankings are inside what we call the Metro 48 school districts. As you can see, we're pretty low in district level administration. We rank 45th out of 48. In most all of them, probably the highest one that we are in that's a little higher is we're 20th in regular instruction, meaning that we try to put more of our money back into the classroom than we do in the other sides of it. It's just a nice reference to have to see where we rank spending wise, where we really don't have a lot of spending relative to other districts. And then, and this one is the comparison of the state level. And actually, tell you the truth, the way this virtual media is going, I can't read the far right column because your smiling faces are in the way. That's a little thing in the way, but you can see where we rank statewide. These are just good references for you to look at, but as you can see that compared to the state average, we spend about 2,200. Well, total general fund operating expenditures, we spend about $403 per student more than the state average. Then if we look at program wise, where does the dollar go? Regular instruction is 46%, special ed's 19%, and then instructional support. So most of the money goes back into the classroom. Pupil support is the actual transportation of the students, so we got to get them to school. And then the sites and buildings are 12%. We got to have a place for them to go. So really, administration is 3.7% of a dollar, and district support is 3.7%. So we try to get all our money into the classrooms, or else getting them to the classroom, or cleaning the classroom. So as we look at this budget, I know it's not great news, but we got to face the facts when we see them, and we got to hope that, we did all this work before we had the big shutdown, so we probably may have some good savings along the way, but we're not committing to any yet in the areas of utilities, and we didn't get any more snow, so there's no more snow removal bills, things like that. So we'll probably do a little better than I'm saying tonight. You got to kind of watch out for the financial implications of COVID-19. We're watching the legislation to see what has to happen or if there's any new ways of funding. Right now, the only thing that's got really any hope on the horizon is they're looking at allowing us to transfer money from from some reserved accounts in the general fund that we haven't been using up to cover for the losses we're incurring in the school nutrition fund and the community services fund. And at the next board meeting, I'm going to have the school nutrition budget presented by Wendy Peterson and the community services fund budget presented by Bob Lawrence. And they'll tell you what's kind of going on with this whole thing, because basically school nutrition was looking at a surplus of about $1.2 million in their fund, but by the time this is over, it's pretty much wiped out. And you might ask, why? We're still serving, X amount of meals. And at the last look we had, it was 16,000 a week now. We will get reimbursed for those. Well, we generally serve about 14,000 a day. And at 20% free and reduced, we rely so much on private pay and a la carte sales. Obviously, if the doors are closed, we're not getting it. If you're a district that's more dependent on free and reduced, you're used to being reimbursed for most of your meals. It's not a big shock to your system. It was a shock to our system, and that caused the fact that we had to furlough some employees. Community services is run into the same issue. Most of their revenue comes in from fee-based programs, the largest one being school-age childcare. So they're running their fund balance low too. So right now they're serving school-age childcare all day, but only at 5 sites. They're used to doing it all year long at 16 sites. We will monitor our enrollments. It seemed to be looking pretty good for next year, another little increase. We'll see what happens in 2021. We will carry over all the discretionary compensatory dollars that were not used. And we had a purchase order cut off on April 15th, which helps us to establish the books better, get a better handle on what we're going into next year with. So with those concerns and everything built in, we looked at, what am I projecting for the fund balance into this year and then the year after. And like I say, it's conservative, but I know that we're going to have to do some transfers maybe to cover up those COVID-19 expenses and the other funds, things like that. So at the end of this year, we're projecting about a 3.69% unassigned fund balance. And at this moment, at the end of 21, we're projecting a 2.93% unassigned fund balance. Now we're in the process of putting together the 21 budget, the staffing budget. The staffing is done. There's compounding the numbers is still going on. I projected out the revenues. I'll take another look at those. We'll present that budget the first meeting of June and ask for your approval by the end of June. We'll have a little better idea when we look at that budget too. We do know that the state formula is set for next year at a 2% increase. The years after that are going to be probably pretty dicey. So what else could influence our fund balances? Well, legislative outcomes, just for a marker, 1% on the formula is at least $1.3 million for our school district. If they don't, we're projected in law, we're supposed to get a 2% increase next year. If that holds out, then we know we have that coming in, but the 2 years after that, we don't know what's going to happen. We're afraid the state won't really have any money because of collections. If you remember, most of their money comes from sales tax and income tax, and those are going to be way down. So we may have to plan on a 0% increase in those in the next biennium. Special education funding plays a role if they can ever keep increasing the effect on the cross subsidy. Other revenues, preschool revenues, we are getting more and more state aid on preschool as we get more programs approved into that program. Of course, contract negotiations and then unfunded. So what's next? We will ask you at the next meeting to approve the 2019-2020 revised budget. We'll complete all our staffing for the 21 budget. We'll calculate the state aid revenue and other revenues based on legislative actions and enrollment. First reading of that budget will be on June 4th. And then they're going to start doing in July the 1920 audit, which I was informed today is going to be all remote, which will be different. We won't get to see the little, they always send these little young guys to do it, young guys and gals. You have one old vet and the next one, you think they're still in 9th grade. But we won't get to see them this year. They're just going to do it all remote. And that's it. I'll welcome any questions if anyone has any.
Hey, Dan, this is Simi. I just had one question regarding health insurance. And I think you had said that we're still looking at self-insurance. What is the savings that we would have to see from self-insurance before we would take that step? And how many peer districts self-insure for health insurance? And do we think that self-insuring would lead to further cost savings, like 5 years or so or more down the line?
We would have to see flat or like no increase in health insurance. So what they'll do is they'll give us bids and projections. They'll give us bids on the normal regular insurance, and maybe 3 companies will bid and they'll show the increases in the rates for the next 2 years. And then some of them will run self-insurance models. And we would have to see no increase or significantly less increase than what's projected in the other. So it's really going to be kind of a wait and see to see what it looks like. The self-insurance is not one in which we're going to administer everything. We'll still hire a TPA to do it, but we would have to pay all the premiums out of our own pot of money. But the best thing about self-insurance is, insurance companies are in there to make money, obviously. Sometimes they lose money, but the money they make would be money that we would have. Yeah, because we would just be paying. We'll still pay the 15% to a third-party administrator. And if we do well, then we get to keep the rest. The problem is, if you don't do well, then you're going to have to raise the premiums pretty fast. The other question was, our peer districts. And if Kevin's listening, maybe he can chime in if he's been talking to his colleagues. From what I recall, of the top 10 largest districts in the state, I think one just shifted, so probably 7 to 8 of them are self-insured.
I would say too, the self-insurance, it's a common practice. I was in districts that have been self-insured. It's just the first time you move, there's all the concerns. And that's why Dan has talked with consortiums, because they're established. There's other districts there that would be a potential to take a look at. The other thing with the future, as Dan mentioned, I've already heard from our legislators that we should not be planning on any type of increase the next biennium after this last budget projection. Now, hopefully some things will, our budget in the state will change over the next year. And so that next biennium that we have a chance to look at it, at least a cost of living. But we're planning, and in talking with Dan, we're planning on zero increases, which really impacts us as we think about after next year and beyond.
All right.
Is there any concern that they would not do the increase next year that they've committed to, the legislature?
Well, I brought that up to the one legislator, and as Dan said, that's in law, and that was not something that they felt would happen. But when you don't have any money and your tough times are here, there's always a chance. Dan, I think you probably have much better handle on that, and I jumped in there before you started.
That's okay. Yeah, we had a MASBO meeting today, and that subject came up, and consensus is actually that we're not really worried about them shifting that dollars, although they could, I guess, but it would, take major movement. But they think that their next step would be to start doing aid shifts or property tax shifts. And the aid shift would mean that right now they pay us our aid, designated amount, 90% during the year, and then the rest of the 10% comes in the 3 months after the year end. When times got tough for the state back in 2009, 2010, they shifted it to a 80-20 shift, and then they did a 70-30, and then a 60-40. And when it got down to 60-40, meaning that they would pay out that we would recognize the whole 100% accounting wise, but we'd only get 60% of the cash that we're supposed to get. And that way they could recognize less on their budget, the state. The problem there is if you don't have a lot of cash on hand, you have to do what's called some short-term borrowing, either through aid anticipation certificates or tax certificates. And so instead of earning interest, you're paying interest. It's almost a double whammy. But that's probably the next move we're speculating that they would make if they had to, is shifting the aid from 90-10 down to 80-20 or 70-30. And we'll just have to deal with it if it happens.
And then for the shifts in the reserve, you said that the legislature or someone is considering allowing us to shift funding from underutilized reserve accounts to the general fund to cover shortfalls, correct?
Yeah, well, it will allow you to, I guess you can always transfer from the general fund your unassigned amount. The difference here would be that you could use some reserved accounts that you would never be able to use them for the reserve use, but at least it's not going to affect your unassigned amount.
So then would this allow us to keep our general fund relatively flat while still addressing the costs that or the shortfalls that we've incurred?
Yeah, the unassigned amount. I mean, the total general fund balance would be lower, but the unassigned is what we're really worried about. And that one would, that would stay flat.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Scary time. All right, 9.0 discussion items. 9.1 is grading during COVID-19, and Dr. Jacobus will present that item.
Thank you. I'm going to start out, give you some background and some of the aspects we've been talking about and think about. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Jansen to talk a little bit more in depth. And then we want to make sure that everyone's voice is in the room. So once we get ready for your discussion, we'll start with whoever wants to start. And then I want to make sure we go down the row, so to speak. I'm looking at the row. But then all of you have a chance to say what you're thinking. And when everyone has had their chance, I'd like to go back and give you another chance because you might have heard things that made you think of other aspects to discuss. The reason this is a discussion item and not an action item is that we do not have a policy on the grading system. So we're asking for consultation tonight. As you remember terms, when we looked at the management part of the district and the policy, it's informal consultation. But your consultation is very important. We've already heard a number of people through our public comment about what they feel about grades. But the background is, as you know, and as Kelly had said when we talked about the distance learning 2.0, as this pandemic struck, we had 9 days to change our entire system. So we shifted careers in 9 days for teachers who had not taught in any type of online format. And as Kelly mentioned, we did not move to online learning. We do have online classes. We have teachers that have taught or have been trained in online. They do an outstanding job in a true online class that is taught by an instructor who has been trained in online. is very comparable and rigorous as they go through the entire semester. We shifted to an on or a distance learning. And for some teachers who were very successful with technology, it was less of a difficult shift than for other teachers who are very successful in our traditional classrooms and working with kids face to face. I would say, as was mentioned in the videos, all of our teachers feel like they want to have the kids in their classroom. But this was a tremendous shift. And now we are in a non-traditional system. And we're in a non-traditional system in the way we're teaching. But we're also now looking at how do we assess? And we need to shift away from a traditional assessment system to match the non-traditional system we're in. The guidance that the Minnesota Department of Education has given us is that they are asking us to look at how do we address grading in a better way for kids. The history of grading in the United States since the early 1900s, there's research in that a number of researchers cite from 1908 and 1909 that really highlight the subjectivity of grading and that grading is really difficult to truly assess learning. So we know for over almost 120 years, we have not been grading well or accurately or effectively, both at the public school, K through or pre-K through 12, but also at the college. This isn't that our level is the only one struggling. So as the state asked us to look at, how do we make sure that through no fault of students, that they are not hurt by the shift in distance learning, and also make sure that, or ask us to look at how do we look at assessment differently. So we have been taking a look at what colleges are looking at, what are the ramifications of any type of grading system. We know, and if you looked at the survey, we're teaching less content than we did normally in our trimesters. So this trimester is different. So the grades are going to reflect different learning because we prioritize standards. You also saw by the survey that 66% of the teachers felt like at the high school level, the relationships were not as strong. So everything is different. And it warrants a deep examination of how do we assess and how do we take a look at all kids. Certainly some systems work well for some kids, other systems work well for other students, but we have to look at all of our students, all of our almost 19,000, and make sure what our decision is, that it doesn't harm anyone and it helps as we go through. If you've read the research or just the discussions around the country, districts are doing it differently all over the country. Some districts have stayed in a traditional grading system. Some districts have gone to a pass, no pass, or no pass, incomplete, like we've looked at the middle school. Some have done a combination. Colleges have gone to pass-fail, both elite, highly selective colleges to community colleges, because everyone knows that this is not the same semester. And for us, we were fortunate it was one trimester out of the school years. For seniors, it's one trimester out of their high school career versus even a semester system. So we've talked about the potential changes that we ought to look at, and I'm going to ask Kelly to take a look at or to explain the options that we would like you to discuss. We've also heard from parents and students that some parents and some students have done better in the online environment. There's a number of reasons that might work well for them, and that's wonderful. Some students who are really doing well in our traditional setting are really struggling. We have examined the number of kids failing right now, and again, we're just talking at the high school because we have made the decision at the elementary and the middle school, and we're comfortable in moving forward there. It's at the high school. But we see a number of students that really were doing well, and now this system isn't working, and there's a lot of reasons. They may not have a place to work that's quiet. They might have other responsibilities. That's why Kelly mentioned the asynchronistic learning, that we didn't expect that they would be online at a certain time if they couldn't. So all of that, and I think for the audience that's listening, they've thought about this too, and they're thinking about their own children. in high school, and I have a high school senior. How is this working for them, and what does this mean to them? So there are a lot of strong feelings about grading and a lot of emotion tied to this. So this discussion is important. We want to take our time and give you as much time as you need to give us all the feedback, and then we will take a look at, we'll talk next steps at the end. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Kelly to talk about what we've been discussing and options that we'd like you to talk about.
All right, thanks, Dr. Jacobus. So I put them kind of in summary form, knowing that you were going to have a discussion. So I thought the best way to do that would be in a presentation, just so you could see things as I was talking about them. And we know, as Dr. Jacobus mentioned, we were going to need to make a decision, and this is one of those things, as with many things in educational leadership, that we know we will not make everybody happy. So we wanted to make sure, as we had conversations, we had some guiding principles that were guiding our conversations. And so we tried to, as we looked at expert material that's out there and some of our original thought, this is kind of the list of the guiding principles that we came up with. We want to ensure that our grading system takes away any negative, as much as possible, the negative impact of school closures on students, that we minimize that. And especially on our students who have been historically marginalized and underserved, not only in distance learning, quite honestly, but by our system in general. And so this is really the most important and overarching principle guiding our decision. We wanted a systemic grading process. We didn't want each high school to determine what they were doing. We wanted to make sure that we were supportive of each other, knowing that we're all going to get questions regarding this. And that's been something that I've been really proud of as our district. We've had lots of conversations. Our principals, assistant superintendents, Dr. Jacobus, we've had lots of great conversations, and everybody's heart and head is in the right place. So I'm confident that we will have each other's back, so to say, when it comes to being a systemic grading process. We also know, based on MDE's guidance, that we have to create a system that allows for some flexibility to meet the students of our unique student populations, considering both long and short-term flexibility, as we cannot predict how this virus will continue to alter public life. That's directly from the Department of Ed. There's not a lot of guidance on what that actually means, so we're having a lot of conversations internally about that for us. And we know that grades are motivators, and so we want to, knowing there's a few weeks left of distance learning, make sure that we are keeping students engaged in learning and we are keeping our educators excited about teaching. Grades are a tricky subject, not only in distance learning, but always. So for those kids who it is a motivator, we don't want that to go away. And for those educators who know that they can use those grades to help teach and get learning across to kids, we don't want to lose that either. So these are kind of our guiding principles as we have conversations. Things that have come up in discussion, and you've heard these over and over, so I won't take a ton of time. We know distance learning presents a number of factors that affect a student's performance. Online, that there are so many things happening in kids' lives right now that we've talked about them all. Access to internet, potential to be contributing to the family finances. There's a number of factors, along with, and it was mentioned in one of the student comments, the potential doubt for the integrity of who is performing the work. You know, in an online environment, teachers are very skilled at putting safeguards in place for that. Our teachers are working really hard for that to happen. But there certainly could be that potential doubt on who is performing that work. So lots of factors about distance learning. We mentioned it before that trimester 3 started in distance learning, so there was no opportunity for students and teachers to get to know each other in a face-to-face environment. We also know, third bullet's the same as the first. My apologies. The next bullet, a grade earned in distance learning, and Dr. Jacobus mentioned this, that a grade earned in distance learning does not reflect similar learning as a grade earned for that same course in that traditional, what we consider traditional environment. We shouldn't be comparing a grade. We talked about the content that's being covered, the skills of the teacher being able to transition to distance learning, the kids, what's affecting their learning. So to compare a grade from this trimester to any other grade is not good practice. And then the last two are from some recent guidance from the Department of Education, that reporting models must provide choice for educators, students, and guardians, while also realizing that all choices are not equal and all choices come with consequences, and that students should not be reported as failure and or retained or given an F during distance learning. So we've had some conversations, especially at the elementary level, about retention. And so those are the last 2 points of discussion that we've had based on what MD put forward for us. So for our middle school, we had started distance learning, making the decision that it was going to be pass or no pass was what we had said. When we knew it was going to extend through the year, we changed that to pass or incomplete. And knowing that middle school doesn't have an end, like a credit assigned to that course, and so assigning that incomplete, just recognizing that learning for that trimester might have been incomplete, and there's just a number of factors that went into it. So middle schools will be on a pass or an incomplete, and allowing teachers to have flexibility to determine what that means. It's not a straight translation from A through D is a pass and F is an incomplete. So just having those conversations with teachers and with kids. We do have courses in the middle school that are getting high school credit, and so those courses that you see listed will be graded in accordance with what we determine for the high school. So here are two that have risen to the top for us, two potential scenarios. That if a student earns an A or a B, that would stand as is on their grade and seen later on a transcript. A C or D would be recorded as a pass or a P, and an F would be recorded as a no credit. And all of those changes would take place on the back end through student information systems. And so final report cards would reflect an A, B, pass, or no credit. And that will be, like I mentioned, done at the end. The other one we've had lots of conversations about, and we have some local districts have made the move recently to this, is that all classes would be recorded as a pass or a no credit. And teachers, just like similar to the middle school, and all of these teachers, we're hoping will exercise that professional flexibility in terms of what is a pass in distance learning and what is a no credit. And then we did put that again on the bottom, that we need to consider the flexibility to adapt to future changes requested by students. The other point that we have had a lot of conversations about is transcripts. And we are looking at the potential that grades are going to be seen, whether it's a pass or no credit or an AB pass or no credit. Grades will be seen on their transcripts. However, grades will not be included in cumulative GPAs, just because this distance learning is so different from the remainder of their high school experience. And then the Department of Ed did provide us with this notation that will appear on all of our students' transcripts that you see there below, documenting that this period resulted in distance learning because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And just cautioning that future use of the grades for academic placement, admission, acceleration, remediation is discouraged, knowing that a lot of those factors might be out of our control. So these are the resources. They're certainly not APA formatted or any other thing like that, but I did want you to know we did reach out, and it was a lot of original thought and a combination of resources that put our guiding principles and kind of our points of discussion together. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Jacobus and be here for questions.
Thanks. So what I'd like you to do, whoever would like to start, and then we'll go through. to give us your feedback on the two options and which option you feel strongly about and why, or how, whatever you want to talk about with the grades, because there's a lot that goes into this as in talking with people, and there's some speculation. One of the things that makes it difficult, we don't know what school's going to look like in the fall. We don't know what colleges and other organizations will do in the fall after they've had some time to think about it. We've been told what colleges have said through MBE as far as the Minnesota system and what colleges are doing with their own grading. But there may be thinking and situations that develop over the summer and into the fall. So I'll stop there, and then, like I said, after we go one round, I want to come back in case you've heard something that brought something else in your thinking. So
I have a question, Pat Driscoll.
Yes, Pat.
What's the reasoning behind doing a C, not doing a C and having it be a pass? Because some kids, really enjoy getting a C. They're working up from a D. So I'm just wondering why you wouldn't include that grade as well. What's the thinking?
Yeah, good point. One of the things, and we talked about that flexibility. If there's a student that has really struggled and this is the first time they're getting a solid C that they feel good about, they could ask for C. We would put that on there. But if you do just no credit for a D, you might as well have grades as you take a look at it. It's really the same. The pass piece is what we were discussing, but we want to be flexible for things like that. That's been brought up also, that a C, and there's nothing wrong with a C. We have kind of got caught up in that the only time you're a great student is when you get an A. But when you really think about what an A is supposed to mean, excellent in that topic. Are we excellent in 6 things every single trimester of our high school career? So a C is great. We're average in all sorts of things, and we're really happy about it as adults, except grading. But yes, you're right. So we would look at that.
Okay, good.
I can start.
Okay.
If that's fine. So I really can see both sides to each of them, but I support a choice of the 2 options. So I think that parents and students together should really make that choice on what option is best for that student. It's really, in my opinion, the most equitable thing for all students and the best way to really do no harm. So some students have been really thriving in distance learning, like we spoke about, while some are really struggling. So having that option takes into account each student's individual circumstances. And I understand, and I certainly don't take lightly the struggles and disparities that distance learning has had on many students, from those who've been having a difficult time learning remotely to those from socioeconomic disadvantaged families that might not have, adequate learning spaces, or might have to work, or might have to be caring for younger siblings. I'm also aware that we've had these disparities and these achievement gaps in our district that existed before this pandemic, and that distance learning could possibly be exacerbating those disparities. But because of this, I don't think that it would be fair or equitable to force those struggling students to accept letter grades if a pass, no credit option is the best for them. However, I also know that there's students that are really doing well in this, and that have been working extremely hard to maintain their high grades for their GPAs, their future applications, and program admissions. And I don't believe it's fair or equitable for those students to have to accept a pass, no credit grade in lieu of a letter grade that they've been working so hard on, especially so close to the end of the trimester. I think it would be a different situation if this started at the beginning of the trimester. There's also issues of scholarships, military recruiting, athletics that are generally associated with the need for letter grades. And I've been really paying close attention to Schoology to look into the work that's been assigned to our secondary students. And I believe that our teachers have done a phenomenal job in implementing distance learning assignments. I don't see it as being subpar. Is it to the same level that face-to-face is? Probably not, but it's certainly not subpar. And it's also very possible that distance learning could continue into the fall trimester or even beyond, like we spoke about. So I don't think we should be setting that precedence that distance learning doesn't merit a letter grade. So these are really unprecedented times for all our students. And I think the best way to really do no harm is to let each and every one of our students choose the choice that's best for them. So that's it.
Thank you. Thanks. So as I go through then, Simi, would you mind going next as I go down the rows?
Sure. And I think I know why you asked me. It's because I am absolutely opposed to having a non-uniform system across all students. And I think one of the challenges you run into when you let students and families choose between a system of grades and a system where you can choose pass, no credit, is that the children who already are the haves are going to be the kids who are going to pick getting grades. And so to have, my kid who does well in school and has a family with no concerns about putting food on the table or a roof over her head, who has access to high-speed internet, who has devices, who has parents who can take time out of their workday to help if she's got a question, and to compare, to have her choose to get an A or a B or a pass or whatever, versus another student who doesn't have those structural, the structural foundation that my kid has, and then that kid chooses to go on a pass no credit system because that's the minimum that they have to do to get through, I think is really inequitable, and it really serves to privilege children who already have more or who already have more resources or more things in their corner. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that for certain kids, like my kid, they're distance learning, but other kids are crisis learning. And so when you're in a crisis situation, it's really about survival and what is it that you can do to get through. And I think it's really unfortunate for us to think about, how we can, I think we really need to be cognizant of the needs and the issues and the concerns for those students who are crisis learning. I did a little independent research and I found that there's something like 10 or 15 state departments of education that have encouraged their state schools to go to a pass no credit or some form of system. And I think it's a recognition of the inherent inequities in education in the United States in general and in our school district specifically. And so, I would prefer that we do a system where we do the least amount of harm to the most number of students. And so I would say that would be a pass no credit system. I do have concerns about that in that when you tell a kid, okay, it's a pass no credit system, and you've worked through April and you've worked through the beginning of May and you have, an 80% and you just have to get 60% to get the pass, you can just basically check out from here on out. And I think there's definitely things that we would need to do to ensure that doesn't happen. I would also be really concerned about the amount of content that students are being delivered to start next year on the same footing that their peers a year ago started. So if you are a 9th grader taking geometry and you're going to start Algebra 2 in September, how do we ensure that you have the same foundational base as a kid who started Algebra 2 this past September? And I would also add that I think, one of the last things about having a choice in the system or a choice is that when you get to a school where, and I know that colleges say they don't do this, but I firmly believe they do, where they only accept a limited number of students from a given high school or a given school district, and you are the student who has an A on a transcript for trimester A and an A on the transcript for trimester 2, and you get a B in trimester 3. And then there's a peer who has the same A, and then has a pass. The college is going to have to, they're not going to be able to forget that there were 2 grading systems in place and that this student was the maximizing benefit that this student was able to achieve was a pass, which means that their grades were lower. I mean, the college is not going to be able to ignore that. And so I think that really, especially if we are talking about students who don't have access to what they need to be successful, I think it really disadvantages them further. And so that would be my perspective.
Great, thank you. Katie?
Okay, so originally when I was thinking about this, I was leaning towards letting families pick. But then I started thinking about the fact that, like Simi said, when you have colleges and they start comparing, what does that look like then? What does it look like for that kid that took the pass? And when do they have to decide? Do they decide after they get their grades? Because I doubt if they had the option, any kid's going to take a pass over an A or a B if they had that option. So it would be very obvious that they got a C or a D. So that would almost lead me to then that we do the pass no credit for everyone. The only problem with that is we do have a lot of kids that are trying very hard to still get those A's and B's. And then for us to turn around and say, oh, yeah, we know you've been working your tails off for the last 2 months, but guess what? Now you're going to get the same pass as somebody who decided to maybe not show up except for maybe 1-2 days a week and just does the bare minimum. And I do understand that there are some inequities with our kids. I don't necessarily think it's just the haves versus have-nots. I think there's a lot of haves that they're still going to only do the bare minimum if they're given the option to do it. And there are some have-nots that are thriving in this environment as well. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say that a kid, just because of where they're at, can't thrive in this type of environment. That I think that's very unfair and that's very inequitable, to make those judgments of our students. So I would probably lean more towards the A, B, and then for C's and D's do pass no credit, because of that fact that we do have all types of students that are really working very hard, and some students that are doing very well in this type of environment. And for us to discredit their hard work by not letting them get the grades that they've earned, I think that is unfair. And to give a student a pass when they get an A and a student a pass when they get a D just doesn't seem fair or equitable to anybody.
Thanks. Louise?
Tony? Okay. When I first started looking at this, I was thinking of that first do no harm. And all I could think about was, okay, there's who's going to get hurt by this? Who's going to get hurt by this decision? Even more than I thought about who benefits. So I thought about if we're on the letter grade system and you have a straight A student and distance learning is not their bag and they drop, that hurts that kid. On the flip side, you can have a kiddo who distance learning is exactly their thing, because you know what, 1 o'clock in the afternoon is the time when they can study as opposed to 9:30 in the morning. And maybe this is kids' first time they ever got a C or ever got a B. I don't want to take that away and hurt that kid. Then I thought again, the high achieving student, and now they're in a situation where maybe parents are furloughed, and so they need to work, and so they don't have time here. And so that letter grade is going to hurt them. And then I thought about the pass, no pass, and our students who leave high school and go into the workforce, and all they have as a resume is their transcript. I don't want to hurt them by not giving a grade. And so this, I went back and forth, and I know distance learning is different, but there's still a learning target attached to every lesson, and there's still very specific plan for what's going on. So as I heard the comments too about college comparisons, taking a look at a letter grade versus a pass, no pass, that will happen anyway because there will be students outside our district. Whichever we choose, there'll be a different system there. So that for me is something I sort of leave outside the decision making because I think it's going to happen. We certainly have inequities in our system. They're not new. Are they exaggerated? I don't know. I haven't seen the data. Can they be? Sure, but I don't, as Katie said, I don't want to make that assumption that kids aren't flourishing because of a certain group they're in. So with that being said, I really like the idea of having letter grades. I'm thrilled about taking the fail out of it and saying no credit. I think that's important no matter what, but I really support those letter grades and having students who would do better under that pass, no pass, being able to say, I would like to opt into that pass, no pass. I don't think that's something that hasn't been done before in our district as well, that students have asked for a pass, no pass when we're in a letter grade system.
Great, thanks. Sharon?
Okay, I'm gonna mystify some of the things that you all are talking about. I sit on the College Access Board, and I also sit on the Law School Admissions Council Minority and Diversity Group. And I've been talking all week with deans, chancellors, and presidents and admissions peoples of the different universities around the country. They have now, most have waived the ACT and SAT scores. They are not looking at last semester, trimester, or semesters of school of grades. What they're doing is looking at previous grades before all of this happened, and they will award scholarship based on that. They'll look at your volunteer opportunities that you participated in. All of those things are going to be what they regard as admissions possible. And students can come from all over. They don't limit where you come from or limit if you come from the same school as two other people. They're not doing that. So I know that for a fact. And then the other thing is that if you get a pass, they know that it's because of circumstances. And you can, one of the things that we could do is to give weight to these grades and note so that if the college refers to the district, how did the student GPA, what ranking, where did they come in? We can give them that if we're keeping track of all that kind of stuff. The other thing is that in Metro Hamlin, we gave choice option. And if you wanted to take your grade for someone who is, like, for instance, on academic probation, then and you got a B, you had the opportunity to bring that because it took you off probation. And so other students, if they wanted a pass, and we also had, we can't do this in our district, we had a withdrawal or incomplete where they can go back and grade. So we gave them quite a few options. And you're right, not everybody was satisfied. The other thing is that you have to look at the opportunity, like for our students from different cultural backgrounds, is number one. I listened to this today, that what was projected that 61% of this COVID virus has African Americans, and 48% of our Hispanic population, and only 31% is not only the lesser of our majority population. So there's a significant gap in terms of how this extends. And then we have to look at how our resources are being distributed. Are we really giving academic support to those who need it? we don't hear from them, how are you going to know? And then I have heard from some parents, level of education that some of the parents have, they don't know what's going on because the kids don't know. And so, and then if you have a household of 4, 5, 6 kids, how you get anything done? And you got the parent or parents working from home. You got that obstacle also. So I think it behooves us to, if somebody works themselves the bone to get an A, and that's what they want, give it to them. I see no problem in that. And depending what Pat said, if somebody was in the C range and they got a C and they want that C, give it to them. And the rest of them, if they just, they're marginalized and they just haven't figured out this distant learning thing, and let them take a pass or incomplete or whatever you decide you want. I'm telling you, the colleges are not looking, they're rocking in the same old boat. In fact, some of the colleges have dorms, are contracting with hotels in case something happens so that the students can be moved from the dormitory. So it's a whole thing. And some schools are opting right now to do distant learning, and kids won't be on campus. So there you go. That's it in a nutshell.
Pat, sorry, that was me, muted.
Okay. Well, I thought I was confused on this, but what I'd like to see is the grades A, B, C, and then for those kids who are in those circumstances that where they struggled with and they got a D or a failure, I think they should have an incomplete or like a no credit and have an option to complete that over the summer. And so that when they come back in the fall, they're not short a credit. If that's possible,
So it would be a variation of that choice where you'd have grades and a pass, depending on what the need of the child was or the student, I should say.
The circumstances where those students who have, no access to internet, they're not doing well, or they just can't pay attention if it's online. They're struggling with the distance learning. Those kids should have that option to pass or no credit opportunity to complete that in the future. If they're in high school. In middle school, you don't think you need to, do you?
No, I think we're set on elementary and middle, but yeah, high school.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Tracy.
All right. Wow. So I guess the one piece that I think is pretty significant is the fact that we are not including this trimester in their cumulative GPA, right? That's okay. So when they are applying for colleges, that in some aspect to me is irrelevant because it's not hurting them and their cumulative GPA when they apply. I think having obviously worked in this particular environment, and I realize it's a different circumstance, but I know that it's difficult. I mean, it's really difficult to function in this particular environment, no matter how strong a student you are or how comfortable you are working from home. If that's the case, I think it's just wearying. It's hard because it's different from what we've known. And so I think that provides, kind of a special environment, obviously, for the kids to learn in. And I think that makes a difference. So personally, I like guess I'm like, I like the uniformity, I guess, the fact that kids will know, the families and the kids will know the expectation that this is the way it is. So I like the, one or the other. I also realize that every district is struggling with the same decision, and colleges, I'm sorry, I think Louise said it, but colleges are going to be seeing a difference in transcripts no matter where they come from, because, we may choose the pass no credit, and another district may have grades. So, part of me thinks that because of everything that's happening and some of the unknowns, we really can't know what every student is experiencing, that the pass no credit would be a good option to go with in this third trimester, especially since it's not going to the cumulative GPA. And, I know from having kids who have applied for colleges, as Sharon had mentioned as well, it's a package. It's not just GPA. They definitely look at community service, volunteering, and they certainly know the unique circumstances of this particular time. They don't need that notation. They're living it as well as we are. So I don't, and I hope, I'm having faith in our colleges and universities and military, where our kids will go next. But I guess I have faith that they're not going to look at one blip in time, that they're going to look at the package for those students moving forward, as far as, so it wouldn't negatively impact them. So I guess that's where I'm kind of leaning for our first round.
Okay. So let me just explain the GPA piece, because if people are watching, they may be wondering about that. If you do a pass, no pass, that's not included in the GPA. So that one wouldn't even be a decision. If we did the choice, internally, we can't have two different systems as kids are coming through our system. If we have students that have been good students and then struggled in this and took the pass, what happens in high school when we make the determination for our honors awards and things the senior year, that duplicate system is not going to work. That's when inequities could show up, whether you can do well on this or not. It has nothing to do with hard work or valuing the students. And so if we have a choice system, that's why we wouldn't have that cumulative GPA coming in. The seniors right now, at this point, is they're moving on already. Most of the applications and acceptances that have happened, we make our determination on the honors designation after the second trimester, so there isn't any issue this year. That's why the GPA. So now we'd like to go back. You've heard everybody's comments. If you've thought about other things or you'd like to add to what you said at the beginning, we'll go in the same order. So Melinda, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. It's nice to hear everyone's perspective on things. That my stance still remains that I think that there should be a choice, since different students, we can't, everyone's experiencing something different, and these are unprecedented times, and I really think a choice is the best option to do no harm. We talked about seniors. They've already lost so much this year, and I think it's just horrific to think that they would also have to lose something they've worked so hard on this last semester. And if they were getting, if you have a straight A student or B student or even a C student, to compare that to someone that's getting a D or F and still having the same thing, I just don't think that's equitable either. And then furthermore, I think Simi talked about the things looking different and wanting things more uniform as far as the either the letter grade system or the pass no credit system. And in all reality, our district already has the option. And I know because my daughter's done this with several of her classes when she was in high school in the district, to when the teacher and the parent decide it's best for that student to have the pass, not pass option. So that's already an option that has a discrepancy in our district. So I don't see how it would be such an issue, especially when there's so many things that aren't going to look uniform right now. I guess that's all I have.
Thanks. All right, Simi?
And so I remain most opposed to the idea of having a non-uniform system. So either we pick system A or we pick system B, but we don't pick both. I think that is where you just add additional angst to students who are already may be struggling with this decision. And I remember a couple months ago talking with one of the credit recovery teachers, and she was walking me through the spreadsheet for credit recovery, and you saw lots of students in very high level classes who had Fs. And I asked, how do you, why are you in this level class instead of moving down a level and passing your class? And she said, well, it's because a lot of times parents don't want to let go of that designation on the report card. And if that's the case, then I think it's a kindness to students to just have one uniform system so that you remove the variable of, you remove that type of variable. And whether we, I will say one of the challenges I have with this A/B pass no credit system is that it doesn't seem fundamentally different than just keeping the system that we have and moving, instead of giving an F, you give a no credit. Like, it just doesn't seem particularly different. And I don't know why we would go through the process of doing something entirely different just to have what seems sort of fundamentally the same. I think really having one system that everyone can understand, that everyone understands is the way to go, is really the most equitable system. I think when you're asking people to choose between two systems, you are introducing more anxiety into a situation that shouldn't have it. And to Melinda's point, yes, the no pass system already exists, but it's not something that is laid out there, or the pass no pass system is something that already exists, but it's not something that's laid out there for every family to choose at the start of, or at the start of the trimester, right? I mean, it's something that you come to after a series of conversations, and is something that is made in concert together. And it's not something that, like, I didn't realize that until, I heard that the other day, because it's never been something that's, I think that if you're going to have a system like that, then you want to keep it for the students who need it, which is the system we already have in place. So it could be that maybe I have fallen into the column of why change anything. I mean, why, if we're going to go with this if we're going to go with a letter grade system, or if we need to maintain choice, then why do anything different than we're doing now?
Okay, thank you. Katie?
And I remember to mute myself since my son decided to tip over a recliner, which is why I had to yell for my husband. So anyway, the fun, of being home all day with your children is really getting to all of us, I think. So I guess I'm starting to get a little more indifferent about which one we pick. If we go with A/B, pass, no pass, I get why some kids would want that. I also think that one thing is too that it's possible that then a kid who did strive very well in this environment goes to a college and can say, hey, I had these challenges, but look, I was able to still keep my grades. I was able to do this. Maybe they want to do an online program in college and they can prove that they can, do these types of things. So I see some of that benefit, that kids can say, hey, I really was able to keep everything together during these times. But then I see it the other way too, that some kids that do great and thrive on that social interaction now don't have that, or they don't have those other kids maybe to feed off of in class, to do those debates with and do those things that really help them understand material more, where they may have gotten A's and B's and now they're getting C's and D's. And so a pass would be good for them to have. I do think that we need to, no matter what we do, it needs to be one uniform system. I don't think we can let people pick and choose, because it will come down to then those that chose because they wanted the pass. Like he said, now where are we at when we start talking about recognition for how they have done? How do we start to distinguish those? Because there might be those kids that say, hey, wait a minute, I still got A's and B's during this. Why aren't those counting when these kids did pass, no pass? So they assume they got C's and D's when maybe they still got those B's, but they didn't want to be. They wanted an A because they're a straight A student, and now they want that. They don't want to be on their transcript either. So pass, no pass is a better situation for them. I think this is a very difficult decision, no matter which one we make, because I don't think you're never going to make everybody happy. It's just not going to happen. But I think, again, whatever route we take, we need to make sure that it is uniform and that everybody gets the same. Like I said, the only thing I worry about is those kids that have really tried to maintain, and now 4 weeks before school's out, we tell them, or not even, because we're not going to make the decision today. So 2-3 weeks before school's out, we're telling them, guess what? We know you've been doing all this hard work, but sorry, you're not going to get your A. You're not going to get your B. You're going to get a pass, just like the person that chose to not do anything. That's the one thing that really worries me, because I know I have one of each in my house right now. I have one that is refusing to do anything, and I have one that is doing everything she's supposed to be doing, and she's thriving right now in this environment because she's not a social kid. So this is great for her. So it breaks my heart to think that we would tell these kids that are doing really well, you know, we understand that you've been really working hard these last, I don't even know how many weeks it is anymore, because it's been forever, it seems like the last 5 years that we've been doing this is what it feels like in my house. And I just, it breaks my heart to think that we'd take all that hard work away from them and say, but you're only going to get a pass, because then I think they're just going to give up. I think they're just going to quit. And I think some of these kids will just stop doing everything because they'll, why does it matter anymore? So that's the thing that worries me, is these kids have already lost so much, and now this might be the one thing that's holding them together, is getting the hard work, getting those grades, seeing them, and then we take it away from them, and that could be, well, I'm not doing anything anymore. So that's the one thing I worry about if we do the pass, no pass.
Okay, thanks. Louise?
I agree with Katie that it's no small thing that our high school students entered this assuming they would get a letter grade and have been working under that, and then we're getting close to this end. That in and of itself feels, especially in light of everything else that's changing, that we, was something stable that they could count on, and to pull that out seems really unfair. The thoughts I have are not necessarily connected to each other, and I apologize for that. I heard a lot of conversation about, colleges will understand and they'll take into account, and they get that education's different. And I can believe that. I have difficulty with those who are looking at a transcript who are not part of the education system. Again, for our students who are going from high school directly to an employer and are competing with someone who's got a letter grade on there, or someone who's competing for a scholarship that maybe isn't coming from a school, but it's coming from the local Rotary or Lions Club, that they are going to need something to build their resume. In terms of something Pat mentioned earlier, the idea of having an incomplete instead of a no pass, I like that very much. I know Kelly spoke to it earlier, those last days of school are going to focus on students who are struggling. But I like the idea of just saying, yep, we understand you need something more and we've got a summer to work on or whatever it takes to do that credit recovery right away. To Cindy's point, people choosing things and maybe not doing, and in our current system, doing that with some kind of conference makes all kinds of sense to me, that if students are going to choose that, they have a chance to walk through it with someone who would understand, here are potential consequences for that. With all that being said, I'm still a believer in the letter grades at this point.
Okay. But when we talk letter grades, we're not looking at staying in the same system. We're talking about the two options.
Correct.
Today. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Great. Sharon.
Okay, let me get this straight. So if we do the choice means that you can take a A, B, or C, or even whatever. And then if you get a D or you don't pass, you pass. If you get an F, you take a no pass or incomplete. Am I correct?
Well, we would still have the pass for the C unless the student wanted it, because you guys have talked about that. So it would be A, B. The default would, because we need a default to set up in the system, and then we could look at individuals, but it would be the A and B would show a P for the C and D. And I like the idea of the incomplete, because we would allow kids to come back. And that's an accurate reflection of your transcript if you're incomplete. That can stay forever and that's accurate. So we could look at the no credit, changing that wording, but that's what it would look like.
So they have an option to take A or B. They don't have to take it, but they can. Is that correct? It's not automatically given to them.
Well, we would set it up, because we have to set up in the system a default, or the way it works. So we put the A and B, pass, and say incomplete. If someone wanted a C, because as you guys have talked about, they felt that this is the first time I've been able to succeed, especially in this class, and they wanted to show a C, we could do that. If they had a B, as Katie said, there may be someone with all A's, and that B is not something they want to say, and they want to say, look at a P, we could look at that. If we're going to do that choice piece, that we could look at that way.
Yeah, that was my concern. That's the way I would like it. But it is, and that's how we've done it. We've given them the total autonomy of choosing if they want to grade, if they want to pass, or if they want to withdraw. And so I'm still in the choice stage, and the incomplete does give students another opportunity to do better. And this is a new thing, so if they didn't get it and they're just now starting to get it and it's over, then they're done. So if we give them a chance, with the incomplete to do better, then I think that would be a good option. And I think it was Simi said that it should be uniform. So yeah, I agree with that portion of it also. So I'm still for the choice. That's what I like.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Pat.
Okay, to piggyback on what Katie said, I like the idea of grades, because if you don't have an incentive, if we just say it's pass or no pass for everybody, then all those kids, like she said, are going to just not try the rest of the year. We've still got 4 weeks of school, and so that's a lot of time. So I think we should just go with the grades and then offer the in circumstances, and leave it up to teachers. They can conference with their kid and the parent, or teachers, some of them don't know the kids well enough, so it's going to be difficult for them to kind of have that flexibility. But I'm sure that teachers are going to give every kid a chance to at least get a C. Or then if they possibly can't get a C, then they should have that option of getting an incomplete or taking a pass. I just think that that's fair.
All right.
And it's probably not one or the other, like you're saying.
Yeah.
But we can't give Fs, right? The state said no Fs.
And we don't want to, because there's a lot of variety of reasons, and we do want to give kids the chance to come back. And so as we've talked tonight, I like the idea of the incomplete.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay, thanks. All right, Tracy.
I guess I want to confirm, if we go with the letter grades, like, they're still not being in the cumulative GPA, right?
Right, because we'd have the pass in there too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So it sounds like the letter grades are more sort of, or more motivation for those who, yes, are, motivated, which I know I just said the same word, but by grades. So, I mean, in essence, it's just for their sort of self-worth, if you will, I mean, in some respects.
And it would be on the transcript when they sent it to wherever they're sending it, so they would see that.
But even wherever they go, they're going to know that that grade is, I mean, in essence, it's just superficial. It's not being included in their GPA. I mean, I just want to make sure if we change it back to grades, we're not throwing that in there. I mean, it almost sounds like, there's a feeling that we're going to change the two choices potentially and make it A, B, C. But then, like you said, I mean, why not just have A, B, C, D incomplete?
Yeah, I'd like to leave the C a pass if we stay in that system, and then if we could deal with individual kids.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I'm fine with the AB pass no, or AB pass incomplete, because it's then we know we've got set expectations, and everybody knows what's expected. So I kind of like the one set of rules. And I think that the AB pass incomplete accomplishes what the options would. Because it seems like if you're going for the options, you're going to get the P or incomplete anyway. So I guess that's
great. We asked our board reps, our students, and we were able to reach Hannah and Maya. And Hannah's take on this was that for seniors, the pass incomplete is great. They should get it. All of them are off already and going, but for 9 through 11, she felt that grade should be kept. Maya had talked to friends who are she got some reports on stress of the student who is considered a critical worker in whatever job is. She's working 150 hours a month or so. It's been really difficult. So she liked the option of the AB and the pass, and now if we call it incomplete. So those are from our student reps. So you can see in our discussions and all the discussions we've had here at Cabinet, we've gone back and forth, continued to look. I'm a parent of a senior who was in a district that went to pass, no pass. One of the things I'd leave as we consider this, whatever we do as educators, since I've been in the profession, which is a lot of years, we've always talked about the hard work. The reward for that is learning, not the grade. We've always been frustrated with that the grade is the issue. So I want you to know that whatever, if we make a decision, and for parents that are watching, and it's not the system that you want, the reward for all that hard work is you left us learning, and you learned, and you're in better shape for whatever you're going to do next year. I'm not discounting the emotions, and I think parents should, and they are doing, they're advocating for their students, and they see what has happened at home. And so trying to find that middle ground has been really difficult, and making sure that what we do is helpful to more kids than it might harm, or that even help neutral. So I think it's a great discussion. I really appreciate your thinking. You may go home and replay this in your mind. And if you're like me, I won't sleep as the night away as I think about these. If there's more you want to share with me, please do. For those of you that might be watching that you're interested, I know there were a lot of comments on our website. We'll read all of those as well, even though we didn't have public comment at this meeting. So thanks so much for that.
Can I just ask a question, or can we get this? Can we just get a read on? Do we have any data on how? We've had like historical achievement gaps and stuff in our district. Do we have data on how well distance learning is going for those communities, or are we going on what we think is going on in those communities?
We've got partial data, and I'd ask Christine or Julie or Mike or Kelly to talk about where the principals are. We see, as I mentioned, a lot more Fs right now, and we're concerned about that. We have anecdotal, yep, from principals talking to parents and kids and looking at the grades that there's been more of a concern for our underrepresented and our kids of color, that they are more kids are not doing as well. But I want to stop there because Christine had looked at some things, and Julie and Mike and Kelly, any input, but we're looking for more quantitative data on that to me, because that's an excellent question to make sure that as we say we're concerned, we can show why we're concerned. So.
Right, so this is Christine. So I'll just speak a little bit. We do have John Linder, our assessment coordinator, running that report. And the report he's going to run is looking at students of color and how they were doing in Try 1 and Try 2 compared to how they're doing now in Try 3 distance learning. So he's working on that right now so that we can start comparing that. Just in some data I got from Susie Evans in our credit recovery program, when she bulleted out for all 3 high schools, it appears that it's pretty even. So the percentage of students of color in each school is about the percentage of students failing. Now, we do have a large number of Fs at our high schools right now, larger than we typically would at this time in a regular traditional setting. And so we're working towards, why is that, what's happening? I know that our high schools, principals, counselors, teachers are doing everything they can to reach students. They're calling, they're emailing, they're driving to their house, they're doing everything they can so we don't lose anyone, but we still have students that are just not wanting to do distance learning. And so that's part of that. In a meeting today with our secondary principals, Susie Evans offered, similar to what, I don't remember who asked this, to right away after the last day of school for students, to open up credit recovery immediately for those students so they can just finish what they need to do in the classes they have an incomplete in to get them finished before August. So we are going to work on that. I know somebody had made that suggestion, and Susie has offered to do that in her program because we don't want students starting behind in September. So that's what we know right now. Kelly, do you have anything to add?
I think you covered it all. The only thing I would want to add about the pass and the motivation factor, we still have essential standards. So teachers still have standards that they need. They can say, you can't pass this course unless you pass this standard, or show me you know this standard type of conversation. So as we look at that, I think we could provide some motivation still for those kids who are at the 60% and the law of averages would still get that pass. But if they choose not to participate in essential standard work, then that's something that we can have a conversation about as a potential motivating factor. So as you were talking, I just wanted to throw that out there, but I don't think I can add to the data conversation that you have, Christine.
Christine, when talking about the stats, and we just spoke about the students of color, are we also looking at the percentages of how distance learning is going for our students where English is their second language or who have special needs?
Yes, I don't have that data point, but we'll do that. When we have John run the bigger report, we'll add in special education and EL. That's a good point.
Okay, thank you again for that discussion, and I appreciate your feedback.
All right, thank you. Yeah, good discussion. 10.0 action items. 10.1 is the approval of the release of probationary teachers. Kevin Witherspoon, our Director of Services.
Good evening, Chair Burnett, members of the school board, and Dr. Jacobus. I have several resolutions tonight to go through, and the first one is the termination of probationary teacher contracts. During the 1920 school year, as in past years, we have had many exceptional teachers working for the school district. It is necessary to pass a resolution to terminate the teaching contracts of a number of probationary teachers. The reasons for release include student-driven schedules, licensing issues, pieces of the transfer article, and performance issues. On or before May 7th, you will receive the non-renewal letters of the probationary teachers who must be released at the end of the school year. The resolution terminates teaching contracts at the end of the 1920 school year with a non-renewal for the 2020-21 school year. The administration recommends approval of this resolution.
Driscoll, I so move the resolution.
Louise Hines.
Lear, second.
All right, so moved by Pat, second by Louise. Roll call vote.
Melinda Doles,
Yes.
Louise Hines,
Yes.
Amy Petnaik,
Yes.
Pat Driscoll,
Yes.
Sharon Van Leer,
Yes.
Katie Schwartz,
Yes.
Tracy Burnett,
Yes. All right, motion passed. Thank you. 10.2, approval of release of long-term substitute teachers.
In compliance with Minnesota statutes, we are required to terminate the teaching contracts of our District 833 long-term subs. A long-term substitute, by definition, is one who has worked all or part of the school year replacing a specific teacher who has returned rights to his or her position. The contracts of the long-term substitute must be terminated. Failure to terminate these contracts would result in the district allocating 2 teachers in each affected position as the regular teachers exercise their contractual rights to return from their leave. The administration recommends approval of this resolution.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Sharon Van Leer.
This is Simi, second.
All right, Chair moves, Simi second. Roll call vote.
Melinda Doles,
Yes.
Louise Hines,
Yes.
Amy Petnaik,
Yes.
Pat Driscoll,
Yes.
Sharon Van Leer,
Yes.
Katie Schwartz,
Yes.
Tracy Burnett,
Yes. All right, thank you. Motion passes. 10.3 is the approval of resolution placing continuing contract teachers on unrequested leave of absence.
So enclosed is the resolution to provide notice to intent to place 2 continuing contract teachers on unrequested leave of absence, or commonly referred to as ULA. Effective with the end of the current school year, I am recommending your approval of this resolution. And I will go ahead and read part of the resolution here, which Shen Fei and Yi Feng Quan are continuing contract world language Mandarin Chinese teachers in the district. The discontinuance of teacher positions in the content area of world language Mandarin Chinese is attributable to a decline in student enrollment and change in schedule. The timing of the ULA process requires that a resolution proposing placing teachers for placement on ULA be passed in late May. Both teachers will have the opportunity to request a hearing over the proposed placement on unrequested leave of absence, and any hearing will be held in June, after which the board must read the transcript of the hearing and consider the findings and recommendations of the hearing officer. This allows the district to meet all contractual obligations before the board can take final action regarding the unrequested leaves. This timeline also allows the district time to notify the teachers of the final actions that need to take place before July 1st, 2020 per state statute.
All right, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
Melinda Doles, so moved.
Melinda moved.
Sharon second.
Sharon second. All right, roll call.
Melinda Doles,
Yes.
Louise Hines,
Yes.
Amy Petnaik,
Yes.
Pat Driscoll,
Yes.
Sharon Van Leer,
Yes.
Katie Schwartz,
Yes.
Tracy Burnett.
Yes. All right, thank you. Motion passes. All right, 11.0, reports and comments. 11.1 is our superintendent's report.
Thanks. I just want to do a quick acknowledgement of Teacher Appreciation Week. As we mentioned, we had a very short window where our teachers shifted everything that they do. And I sent a quick email out to folks, but one of the things that I mentioned in there that none of us could have imagined this shift in such a short time and what this might mean to education as a system. But I believe our teachers did this with creativity, skill, perseverance, and confidence. So I want to do a little history of where did teacher appreciation originate. And I had a tough time finding firsthand resources. So I did a little bit on Wikipedia, which is, who knows on history teachers saying that there's some accuracy there. But in there, we know that in 1953, the Congress, after Eleanor Roosevelt spoke to the Congress, the 81st Congress, they proclaimed a National Teacher Day. Then I found some holes in the history as we looked, but in 1980, the Congress declared that National Teacher Day would be on March 7th. So the NEA and other teacher organizations looked at that Teacher Day on Tuesday, the first Tuesday in March until 1985. Then the PTA established National Teacher Appreciation Week, and the Teacher Appreciation Day moved to that first week in May, the Tuesday of the first week of May. So there's been a long history of thanking teachers for their work. I think this year it's much more meaningful as parents have seen and all of the learning and teaching was visible through our distance learning and around the country, the work that teachers do every day. And for parents who have a number of small kids, I think they are seeing teaching maybe in a much different light, and that's wonderful for our teachers, and I just want to thank them. I'd also like to thank our kids with all of that discussion. They really have put their best foot forward as well. Even though we're struggling, as was mentioned, we have some things to do to make sure that our kids are successful as they finish. But this is really a unique time, and I feel very proud of the way our teachers have shifted quickly and have embraced students. I hear from parents the amount of connection and reaching out support they felt from teachers. But I also have heard from parents how the appreciation of teachers because how difficult it's been at home. So thank you to all of our staff and thank you to our students as well.
All right, I'm going to board member reports. Do you want to read? Does anybody have a report they'd like to give this evening? Melinda?
Sure, I can do that. So I attended the governor's call on April 24th, which was very interesting, and the MSBA Zoom meeting for school board members on April 30th. And on April 13th, I sent out letters to Amy Klobuchar and to all of our local legislators on supporting additional funding and flexibility for the IDEA mandates related to our special ed students. So, and I've also been checking in regularly with with the schools that I'm assigned to.
Thank you. Louise?
Yes, I got to sit in with Melinda, with Governor Wall's call and also the MSBA Zoom call, which was very informative, talking about a lot of the things we were talking about tonight. In terms of things that were just really fun to do, I got to go to a couple of the parades. I was at Gray Clouds and also Altman's as the students drove through or their families drove through and got to say hi to students and teachers and entire staff. Pairs were there, lunch people were there, custodians were there, and you could just, the joy to see these groups reconnected was really something special. In terms of highlighting Teacher Appreciation Week, we had another teacher, Jeanette Potman, who's a music teacher at Royal Oaks, was highlighted on KSTP. She, in connection with 30 other teachers across 5 countries, have an a cappella group that they're putting together on something cooler than Zoom. I just don't know what it is. But they have another performance coming out tomorrow. If you just want to take a look at her on Facebook, they're really worth watching. Also, Chris Deese, who's an art teacher at Woodbury High School, had 21 of her students as part of a virtual art show that the Phipps Center in Hudson put on. So there are great things throughout the district and just some thank yous.
Thank you.
And then Tracy, I have a small update as well. all the elementaries appear to be doing parades, and I missed, unfortunately, the Hillside Parade, but I will be showing up for the Nuevas Fronteras and Newport parades that are taking place later this month. At Newport, they are moving to Students of the Week for the month of May, and so each teacher and specialist gets to pick a Student of the Week or 3 Students of the Week, and kids are going to earn Speedway gift cards that will be mailed to them, along with a little note from their teacher. And very excitingly, for the Access program, since distance learning started, 3 students have passed their graduation requirements. And Susie Evans asked me to give a shout out to Sue Berthume, who is their teacher, and really motivated them and encouraged them, didn't let them give up, was really instrumental in helping them complete their requirements. And which just in time for the Hastings GED Center to reopen, so that our students have someplace closer to home to take their tests. And then we've had a huge increase in ESL enrollment since distance learning started. We've had, I think, 21 new students join in, and Susie was telling me how it's turned into a whole family activity now, that students seem to have a little bit different schedules than they typically do, and now kids are getting involved, and so they are really trucking along and having a great spring.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else?
Pat Driscoll. I attended a AMSD meeting last Friday. I think Keith did too. He had it in his report. And I'm also on the subcommittee at AMSD for advising the legislature on closing the achievement gap and what priorities we're going to support. So, and then tomorrow we have an AMSD executive committee meeting. And so a lot of WebExes and Zoom meetings. That's all my.
All right, thank you. All right, seeing no one else. 12.0 future meeting dates. 12.1 May 21st is a regular board meeting, and then our next after that is June 4th. And with that, we are adjourned. Y'all have a great evening and